My name is Stephanie Henderson, and I'm one of the medical librarians here at UK. And I'm joined by a few of my colleagues. Lauren Robinson is the medicine liaison, and Brett Turner is our library specialist, and Kayla Robinson is our graduate assistant. Lauren and I will be alternating between the questions that we've prepared, and then we also have Kayla, who's going to be monitoring the chat for us. So if you have questions, feel free to ask those in the chat. And then Breck will be populating the chat with some links that we'll be referencing today. So you will be able to have those as well. And then also we will post the slides to the Research Workshop Series website. So don't worry about vigorously taking notes. We will provide those after the session. So again, our agenda today is we're just going to review some frequently asked questions about systematic reviews that we get, and then we're going to answer some of your questions that you might have. So the upcoming workshop series, we do have some upcoming ones that are related to the systematic reviews. And then we have some like PubMed basics. We also have like an introduction to Web of Science and advanced psych info searching. So those would kind of be related to the systematic reviews, but then we also have other workshops. So we have EndNote, we have like Social Explorer, and you can see on this slide, we have some other ones. So we hope that you'll join us.
And I'll actually throw in there too that we actually have some of the recordings from the systematic review workshops that we offered last semester available on that URL as well. So that's a great resource too.
Thank you, Lauren. All right, so one of the first questions that we get is like, how can the library help? How does the library help with systematic reviews? And Brett's going to go ahead and put that link to the systematic review guide, and I'm going to go ahead and this is a screenshot of the guide. So what happens with systematic reviews is that we can help in a couple of ways. So there's lots of different ways that we can help, but when there's been literature out there to show that when a librarian assists with the systematic review, it increases the transparency and reduces the bias, especially in that literature search portion. And so we can help you by a couple of different ways. We have like kind of a couple of different models that we work with. One of them is we will consult with you and advise you along in the process. So if you're not familiar with systematic reviews, we can advise you on, here's some of the steps with the systematic reviews. If you have questions about the review type that you might be considering, if your question doesn't lend itself to a systematic review, but maybe a scoping review, we can advise you in that process. We can advise you through the literature search process, tell you what databases you should be searching and which ones you don't necessarily have to search. We could also, look over your search strategy to see if it's comprehensive enough, things like that. And then throughout all the steps of the systematic review process, we can just advise on resources that you should be using. Now, the other option is if time allows, if the librarians are not busy with other systematic reviews, we can work as a co-author with you. And so with the co-author, we do the searching. We sometimes write would definitely always write the methodology in the protocol, and we would write the methodology in the manuscript. We would actually construct the search in order to get the data that you need for the systematic review. We would export it to EndNote, work with any software management that you might have as well, and then we would get the full text for you and advise on the screening process. So that's kind of the two different ways that we can help. Lauren, do you have anything to add there?
I do not. Yes, that is good.
All right.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what type of review should you do. This is a question that we get, or often we have people come to us who are saying they want to do a systematic review, but the question really lends itself more to something like a scoping review or a rapid review. And we can help you decide which one is right for you. There's this decision tree, which I believe is on the next slide. Yes. And this is located on our systematic review page. And you can also find it. I think he put the URL in there. And this is a really great tool developed by Cornell University where it asks you questions and kind of takes you to what type of review you are going to be doing. There are systematically done reviews in all of these. So they're all systematically done, if that makes sense, but they're not all systematic reviews. It's really based off the type of question that you're going to be asking and the length of time you have to do the review. So rapid reviews usually take just a few months, while systematic reviews or scoping reviews can take 12 to 18 months. But the methods are really the same for all of these type of questions. It's really the analysis that is different. Can you go to the next slide for me? We also have this tool. It's the types of review table on our systematic review guide. And we actually give descriptions and examples for each separate type of review. I would say that our most common ones are systematic reviews. Those are usually more clinically based. And then there are scoping reviews, which are much more kind of looking at what is out there. So one I've worked on is looking at what type of e-health interventions have been completed in Appalachia. So that's kind of like looking at a scope, like the full scope of what the literature is saying, and then rapid reviews. So those are the three I'll talk about, but there are some other ones here like mapping and umbrella and mixed study reviews and meta-analyses. Do you have anything to add to that, Stephanie?
And if you want, yeah, I was just going to say, if you want to learn more about the different review types, so there is a tutorial that we did last semester that kind of really goes in more detail of describing the different review types. And it's linked on the systematic review guide. It's there's systematic review tutorials. There's a button for that. And then it is the lit searching versus the systematic review tutorial. So we, in that tutorial, we really describe more of like the types of reviews.
Right, exactly. So, and also we're always here if you have any questions about what type of review best fits your question.
Yeah. So then we do get this question a lot. Do I have to do a protocol? Yes, yes, you have to do a protocol. So if you're doing a systematic review or a scoping review, in order to provide the highest possible quality, you have to do a protocol because that's required. And then you can register your protocol. There's a lot of different registries available depending on the topic of your systematic review or scoping review. Prospero is the one that is most well known, but there's other places that you can register it as well. And we have that listed on our systematic review guide under developing a protocol. And then you can also publish it. So you can get another publication out of your systematic review or scoping review if you publish the protocol as well. So again, guidance can be found on our systematic review guide. It's under the steps of the systematic review, and then it's under protocols. And I will say that a growing number of funders are now requiring protocols to be written for your scoping review or your systematic review.
Yes, and one tool that I like to highlight with people is Open Science Framework. And it's a really great place that you can publish it and register it kind of in one place. It's an open source platform. It's not a peer-reviewed method of publishing, but it is a really great tool. It's a little bit confusing to use for your first time, but we're always here to help with that as well.
So what should be included in the protocol? So again, we have lots of guidance on our systematic review guide. It's depending on what type of review you're doing. The most common is the PRISMA extension for protocols. Then there's also guidance in our the Cochrane handbook, and then it's the Institute of Medicine standards for systematic reviews. So then there's a PRISMA for scoping reviews as well. There's lots of guidance and lots of examples out there. So if you have questions about that, just feel free to contact one of the Med Center librarians to help with that. And then this is the PRISMA extension for protocol. So it really does, it's like a checklist. It tells you what exactly do you have to have. So it's all laid out there for you.
How many databases do I search and which ones? So this is a question we get a lot. The minimum is 2. We usually recommend more than that. It really depends on the data, or it depends on your search question, which databases you should use. So sometimes there's topical or discipline specific databases like CINAHL or PsycInfo. Some of those can even be cross-disciplinary. A lot of the times with like physical therapy or occupational therapy, I recommend searching CINAHL. So there are some areas where they can cross over. We have access to several databases. You can view them at the Medical Center Library's website. Often the ones that we recommend are things like Web of Science, Scopus, of course, PubMed, CINAHL, did I say PsycInfo, I believe? So those are some of the ones that we usually recommend for searching for these type of reviews, whether it's a scoping review, systematic review, or rapid review, or any other form. And you can always view them, as you can see on the screen. You can search for them. The second one, you can always hit selected databases down on the bottom left side, or you can go to our intro button and also view some more databases. They're a little bit sporadic on the website, but they should all be there on our homepage, or at least the most commonly accessed ones.
So what about hand searching? So when we say hand searching, there's like a lot of different, when we say hand searching, it's not actually like physically going to the journal. That's what you used to do. But now it's searching in those topical journals that are relevant to your field. And so maybe you have several included articles from this one journal. You might want to check the table of contents for that journal over the past several years to see if you're missing something. And then you also want to review all of the included articles in your systematic review. You want to include you want to review the references for those articles. So that it's kind of sort of like citation tracking, but that's what we say when we say hand searching. The term is kind of outdated, but that's really what we mean. Lauren, do you have anything to add?
Nope, that was it. Okay, what should my inclusion exclusion criteria be? So this is really dependent on the type of review you're doing. Something like a scoping review might have more broad inclusion exclusion criteria, while maybe a systematic review has a very narrow inclusion exclusion criteria. You can actually view a resource here from the University of Melbourne that gives you examples of common exclusion and exclusion criteria. These include things like date, peer-reviewed, reported outcomes, the setting, the location, the language, the study design, type of publication, and the type of participants. One thing about language is you do need to state that you're only going to be looking at English language titles, or you try to get things translated. You need to put that in your protocol or your methods and your manuscript and explain why you did that. You have anything to add to that, Stephanie?
Nope. Okay. All right, so another question that we get a lot is, can I just use keywords? Or it's not necessarily a question, but people have come to us with a search and they want to know if the search is good, and they're missing all of the subject headings, or it's just all subject headings and there's no keywords. So according to systematic review guidelines, every guideline, even for scoping reviews, any type of review, there's guidelines and they state that you have to search the subject headings. So that would be MESH and PubMed, CINAHL subject headings and CINAHL, APA thesaurus of psychological index terms and PsycInfo. Though you have to search those along with your keywords. So those would be things like your natural language terms searched with the field code title abstract. There are certain databases that don't have subject terms. So if you, for example, Web of Science and Scopus, they don't have that. And one thing that I'll note is that you'll see here on all of our lists of databases and all of our examples, we don't say Embase. Embase is an excellent database that you should search for systematic reviews, but we do not have access to it. So that one is we don't list it. But if you do have access to Embase, or a colleague that you're working with on a systematic review has access through their library, I would definitely suggest searching Embase as well. And Embase has Mtree, I believe it's called Mtree, is their subject term.
How do I know when my search is correct? Talk to a librarian. We're always here to help. We can help review your search that you have. We can help review your keywords, your subject headings, and help you figure out if there's things that are missing. Again, there's also the PRESS checklist, and there was a link to that. And here is the an example of what the PRESS checklist includes. So when you're doing a systematic review, we usually recommend starting in something like PubMed, and PubMed is searching Medline. So they're not actually two separate databases, which is often confusing. PubMed is an interface that we're searching Medline with. So you usually start there, and then you have to translate to other databases. So there's different languages essentially that each database speaks, and we call that syntax. So you have to change the syntax and remove subject headings for certain databases that don't use subject heading searching, and that's all called the translation process. And that's where errors often can occur. So we can definitely help you with that, and that's also one of the major areas to check when you're reviewing a systematic review search. There's also different rules for Boolean operators and proximity operators. Like PubMed does not have a proximity operator. And so sometimes you have to adjust for those type of things from database to database. Boolean operators are pretty much the same, but it's truncation can be a different symbol, how a database handles truncation, and other type of syntax changes can be affected. So the PRESS checklist is a great place to go, but also please feel free to reach out to us if you have questions about that process.
And I will add that, a lot of you all are experts in your field. Like you know about your topics and you know it well. You're the content expert. And so librarians are really the searching experts. This is what we do every single day. We work within these databases. We know the language that the databases speak, and we can quickly point you in the right direction for correcting a search or missing a term or things like that. This is what we do. This is what we're experts in. So I just want to encourage you that you really should consult with us, because this is what we do. You all do your things and you're experts in your things, but this is what we're experts in.
I agree. I 100% agree.
Can I limit by the last 10 years? So this is a question that we get a lot. And a lot of times people will write into a protocol or write into a systematic review methodology that they want to limit to like last 10 or maybe last 20. You cannot put limits on a systematic review search or even any of the review searches that we have been talking about without rationale behind the limitation. So for example, if a therapy was not developed until, like if it was developed 10 years ago, yes, if you're doing a systematic review on that therapy, you can limit by the last 10 years. But you have to have a rationale behind the limitation. You can't just say, I'm doing a systematic review and I'm just limiting to the last a few years of literature because I don't want to review a ton of literature. You can't do that. And I will say too that putting those kinds of limitations on it increases the bias. And so we want to make sure that our systematic reviews and our scoping reviews do not have unintentional bias. And putting a limit like that can increase the bias. That's a natural thing that we typically do when we're doing literature searching. We always limit to the last few years because we want the most relevant and current literature. But when you're doing a scoping review or you're doing a systematic review, that those limitations can't be put on without rationale for that.
Okay, do I have to use the PICO framework? No, you don't. Often the PICO framework doesn't really translate 100% to a systematic review question because you're never going to be searching outcomes, right? You're never going to be trying to guess every single answer that you're looking for, because the goal of a systematic review or a scoping review is to look at the literature and determine what is the best practice from the literature, or to look at what is the most common topic in the literature, like for a scoping review. So but you can always use a framework. There are other frameworks, and sometimes I would say systematic reviews especially can go to one of these frameworks a little bit easier than some of the other review questions. But of course, you can see there's several different ones you can use. There is a resource here called Formulating the Evidence-Based Practice Question, a review of the frameworks, if you want to read more about the different frameworks and how they can be useful. You have anything to add there, Stephanie?
Nope, I would just say, if you have questions about that, just ask one of the librarians.
Yeah, definitely.
So how do I search PubMed? So we can't tell you right now, like all the ways to search PubMed. We don't have enough time. But one of the things I would suggest is to watch a tutorial. So we have a couple of different tutorials on our systematic review guide. We have, we have on the past research workshops, there's a basic introduction to PubMed, but then on the systematic review guide, there's an advanced PubMed tutorial. So that's really the one that you want. If you don't know anything about PubMed, I would suggest watching the basic one first. But then if you know some things and you need the advanced searching for, working through a systematic review search, watch that advanced searching tutorial. And then talk to a librarian. So I say, I'm always like, hey, just talk to a librarian. But it's true. We can actually set up consultations with you and walk you through a search process. There's a lot of things going on with PubMed. You have to understand the mesh database and understand how to combine searches using the Boolean operators and truncation, things like that. And fairly recently, there was a new edition, not necessarily a new edition, but a new version of PubMed that came out. It came out less than a year ago. So we want to make sure that you understand some of the things that are happening with the new version. So for example, with truncation used to only allow for 600 variations. Now it allows for unlimited. So that's just a difference between the old PubMed and the new PubMed that you wouldn't necessarily know if you probably weren't a librarian or if you didn't talk to someone. So I would suggest, those are the ways that I would suggest searching PubMed. Watch a tutorial, talk to a librarian, set up a consult, and we can definitely help you with that process. If you have graduate assistants or if you're students, you can meet with us one-on-one. If you're a faculty member and you're wanting your class to learn how to search PubMed, we can always set up a mass, like a session for your class as well.
Does UK have a subscription to Covidence? So just in case you're not aware what Covidence is, it's a program that you can upload all your search material into, and then it will actually help the researchers through the systematic review process. It will create your PRISMA flowchart. It'll do some other things for you. Of course, I would say every program has errors, so it's always good to have documentation and to double check yourself even when using a software like this. But we do not have access to Covidence at UK. There are other alternatives. EndNote is the one that we use most commonly because we do have access to EndNote across campus. There is a table on the systematic review guide that's also in your chat as a link. And it goes through all the different products and whether or not they're free or if they do cost money. I have used Rayon before. It's a free version. It actually is really good at blinding. So if you wanted to upload your results from EndNote library into Rayon, you could actually blind the different reviewers. You could do that with EndNote as well. But there's a little bit more intelligence built into Rayon where it helps figure out if there is disagreements rather than you all as the researchers having to do that with EndNote. But EndNote is great. We're going to talk about that in a moment, but it is what we do have available here at UK. Anything else? Nope. Okay.
No, sorry. It just took me a while to get to the next slide.
Okay.
So talking about EndNote, how do you export to EndNote? So we do have a guide, an EndNote guide, and in the help and resources, there's lots of really good information. Rick put that link in there for you. Here's a screenshot of it. So this download and setting up EndNote, there's instructions for how to download, how to set it up. When we say set it up, it will actually link you to, it will tell you what you need to add so that you can get the full text articles. It's not going to be every full text article, but it's going to be the majority of the ones that we do subscribe to through UK libraries. So there is some syntax that you have, or syntax, like there's a search string, a URL that you have to put in there. And then the next PDF is this importing and exporting that will tell you how to import and export from the most commonly used databases, including Google Scholar. And then this EndNote Health Sciences site, while you write, if you're writing the manuscript, that will help you import your citations. If you're not familiar with using EndNote for systematic reviews, you can meet with a librarian and we can go over the best methods for deduplication and the best methods for setting up your folders within EndNote so that you can share them with your review team and you all can each do the review of the abstracts and the full text. So if you have questions about that, we'd be happy to meet with you individually to give you some more information. But this is the help guide that will show you how to export. And then we also, further down on the page, there is some tutorials for how to use EndNote for Windows and Mac, X9, EndNote 9. But then like a new EndNote is coming out. I think it's EndNote 20. Yesterday, it was just pushed to university-wide. So we are having an upcoming session with the new EndNote 20. I believe that is in a couple of weeks. So if you have EndNote questions, feel free to contact the Med Center for any questions regarding that.
Okay, so can you give me an example of a systematic review question? So this is an example of one of a systematic review question. So what is the effectiveness of the Gardasil vaccine compared with the Cervarix vaccine? I might have butchered that. I apologize if I did. In preventing human papillomavirus infection in adolescent and young adult women. So that is clearly a systematic review question because you're comparing two different vaccines in a specific population. So you can go out and find, for example, RCTs from that question, if that's part of your inclusion criteria, and come up with an answer through analysis of those articles or citations that are included.
And then can you give me an example of a scoping review question? So a good example would be what types of neurological reactions to the human papillomavirus vaccination have been reported. So this one is a very broad. So again, we're not looking at a clinical effectiveness review question like we were in the last one. This one is, we're just looking at what are all the different types of neurological reactions. So that one is very broad, and that's what you would get for more of a scoping review question. those are the more broad questions. They're not necessarily like a clinical effectiveness question or a clinical intervention question. We're just looking at a more broad question.
Okay, how do I read a mesh scope note? So we're going to go to a mesh note or a mesh scope note. So here is an example of what you'll find when you're searching the mesh database. So for example, if you search exercise in the mesh database, you will see exercise, and then you will see the definition right below it. I always recommend to really read these definitions and make sure the database is interpreting the word the same way you and your field is interpreting the word. There are several different definitions for several different words, like critical illness versus mortality, and some other terms that kind of gets lumped into some searches. And it's always important to read those definitions to make sure you know exactly what you're looking at. And then again, there's going to be subject headings right below it. We don't usually recommend using these for systematic reviews. There are times that you do, but often we ignore those. One unique thing about PubMed mesh terms is that PubMed automatically explodes a subject heading. So as you can see down on the bottom right side here, you can see kind of all the mesh headings are, sorry, I'm going out of order, I apologize. You can see that everything is in kind of a hierarchy. So if in this example, if you search exercise, it's going to automatically get exploded and search everything underneath it. No other database that we really have access to does this. So it's important to know that that's what it's doing. You can turn off explosion. Do you mind going back really quick? By hitting the do not include mesh terms found below the term in the mesh hierarchy. So that's what you can do, and it will add like the term exercise and then no EXP next to it. And that will mean indicating that it's not exploding. There's also all these things called entry terms, which you can see on the right side of the screen. And these are terms that are indexed with exercise. So these are terms that I often recommend users to go to find more synonyms. So these are things you'd want to include as keyword searches. So you'd have your mesh heading exercise, and then you'd have your keyword search exercise, exercises, physical activity, physical activities, acute exercise, so forth and so on. The comma, as you can see, it says activity, comma, physical, or activities, comma, physical. That's kind of an outdated use. It's an old version of PubMed. You don't have to search it that way. It's just a really good place to go to know which terms might be related to your search term. There's also something called previous indexing, and this is really important for systematic reviews, scoping reviews, any review really. And that's because, as you can see, exercise was added in 1989, but the prior indexing was exertion and physical fitness, and it gives you the date ranges. If you're searching the database through inception, so back all the way to the 60s, you'd want to OR exercise with exertion and with physical fitness. So you'd have OR, all those OR together. And that's because that's the only way you're going to be searching all the way back to inception of the database, because they don't go back and edit prior indexed articles very often. So you'd have to include those to make sure you're getting everything in the history of PubMed. There's also a really great tool called See Also. These are terms that are often related to this term. They might be more specific, or they might be on a different tree, but that's a great place to go as well to find more terms that might be pertinent to your topic. So this is really the benefit of a scope note, is that it provides you all of this really great information. It will provide you keywords, definitions, so forth and so on building your systematic, or on building a systematic search, whether it's for scoping or systematic review. You have anything to add to that, Stephanie?
No, I would just add that, the mesh scope note it's critical that you understand it and that you use that you use mesh terms and you're searching.
Yeah,
As
I'm
well.
sorry.
No,
This is
I was going to say, and we provide training for it.
we do. Yeah. And this is one reason we recommend starting with PubMed often is because it has probably the most comprehensive subject heading database in the health sciences. So it's a really great place to start just because it's going to give you so many clues on what else to include.
All right, so that's the end of our, our frequently asked questions. So we want to open it up to you all, the participants. Do you have any questions for us as for systematic reviews? Do you have any systematic review questions, or even anything related to reviews or EndNote or anything like that? Feel free to either unmute yourself or you can type it in the chat. We're really we want to know what you're working on, and what questions do you have?
So there's a question in the chat. On inclusion and exclusion and translation, what kind of standards are there for using non-English articles or databases? For instance, can I read/speak French and I have folks who can translate Hindi, Turkish, etc., but they aren't certified or anything? I'm not really like, I usually recommend users to go to language departments in the college to see if they have people who will translate. That's usually my recommendation. If you can speak an article, I believe, or you can speak and read a language, I think that that is allowed for translation purposes for a systematic review. Stephanie, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, so I would say that there really isn't a standard that says you have to be certified. If you can understand that when in the screening process what your abstract says, if you want to include it, and then in the full text, if you're able to understand and read and fully understand that yes, this would be included in our review, and you can write that up in the methodology, or not in the methodology, but write that up in your data synthesis and analysis, that you included this article in this language because it had all of these components that met your inclusion or exclusion criteria, then it would just be the same as even like a regular English article. You understand and you know that it meets your inclusion criteria.
Yeah. And that's usually the recommendation if you're going to do a really thorough systematic review or any other type of review, is that you would do your best to have all of those articles translated. It's not always possible, but that is the best practice. But I again I don't know of any specific standard. There's another question. Is the protocol similar to what you submit for IRB? I would think so. So I guess these type of reviews don't have to go through IRB, but it would be similar. Like there's that checklist from PRISMA P. So if you're familiar with PRISMA, they have, that's kind of where the PRISMA flowchart comes from, and all the rules or all the guidelines for conducting a systematic review. But yeah, it does. It usually includes some type of introduction. It includes your methods, like how you're going to analyze the data, how you're going to collect the data, how you're going to manage the data, what the author's contributions are. It includes your inclusion and exclusion criteria. So yeah, it includes a lot of the things that I would see being submitted to IRB.
And I would just add that on our systematic review guide, under the steps of the systematic review and then developing your protocol, there is a protocol template that you can look at and see, like, is this similar or not? Because like Lauren just described, that describes everything that you need for the protocol, but then there's that protocol template that might help you as well.
Yes. And if you ever are interested in seeing a few, I have published a few in OSF, so you're more than welcome to reach out to me, and I don't mind sharing some of those with you, so you can kind of see the ones. And they're a little bit different. There are some that kind of follow the PRISMA specific one, and then one where we kind of followed a BMJ approach to a protocol. We can send you the link. Brett, can you find the link really quick if you're on that guide and put it into the chat for us?
I'm trying to get the,
And I'll see if I can
try
find
to
it.
share it. Just a second. So are you guys, do you see the systematic review guide? Like on my screen, Lauren?
I do. Sorry, I was
Okay.
trying to find the link too.
So if you go to the steps in the systematic review, if you go to the steps and then you go to create a protocol, there's the PRISMA checklist. So then here's the systematic review protocol template.
I will. I just found it too, so I can toss it in. Oh, Breck and I got it at the same time. So
Thank you.
Tossing the link.
So it's right here. It goes, again, the background, your methods, your process, your timetable, things like that. So then this is like a generic one. I do have another, I have a template that I work with when I'm registering systematic reviews in Prospero. So I have a couple of examples of those I could send you if you're interested as well.
Yeah, I would say like one thing is Prospero has like a kind of a format that you have to fill in, like it's kind of question and answer. While the OSF option is much more like free forms. You can pretty much create a PDF and upload it. So yeah, we can definitely send those. I can get together the ones in OSF, and Stephanie, if you want to forward those to me from Sparrow, I can send an email.
Perfect. Anybody have any other questions?
Yeah, so for time limitation rationale, is there any guidance regarding the sort of the field has moved on rapidly in the last X years you might find in some particular areas or niche fields? I don't know of any specific guidance. It really depends on the question. So one I've been working on is an e-health intervention one in Appalachia, and like that by itself kind of had a time restraint on it. Like did the internet really become a household item? So I don't know if that answers your question, but it really depends on like the topic. And sometimes I recommend rapid reviews if you need to get the review out quickly because the research is so fast moving. Rapid reviews don't include things like gray literature and things like that. So that would be my answer. Stephanie, do you have anything else on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that if you can put references and like if you can say in your methodology and you can provide references for how the field has moved on in the past so many years, like you could probably get away with justifying that. When you get the peer review, they might question it or they might say something like, please expand on that. But that is one way. Like, I think that's a good example of, providing rationale. So we just don't want to see random limitations, date limitations put, but if you can provide a rationale and you can provide references, that is a way to limit your search.
Yeah, another common one would be, oh, I'm sorry. Another common
no.
one.
Sorry.
And I'm terrible at the Zoom interrupt. I don't need to. Another great example is when you're trying to update a previously done systematic review. That's a really clear rationale of why you're putting a time frame on it. I have worked on some of those where they're updating it from 2013 through today, and that's what they're going to do. So yeah, I think any type of really rationale you provide is enough for that. So I was just agreeing with you, Stephanie.
Yeah. And there are systematic reviews that get published and they have time limits on it and they have no rationale. But again, we really encourage the rationale behind it, again, for transparency and reduced bias.
And I would also say, like, sometimes you get to the analysis part of it and it takes a lot longer. If a librarian's working with you, or if you ask for a librarian's help, I'm sorry for my email beeping, there we can go rerun the searches like closer to the time, so, and to see if there's any new added articles. So that's also a way. It adds a little bit additional time, but if you did have a break, or you're worried about including or excluding the most recent articles, that would be a way to solve that as well.
Yeah, one of the other things that we would just encourage is that if you're thinking about embarking on a systematic review or even any kind of scoping review or any review type that has a searching methodology, it would encourage you to, contact us sooner rather than later if you're needing help with some questions about even developing protocols or even the search for sure, especially the search. Um, Sometimes people have already done the search, they've already analyzed their data, and then they come to us and they ask us, is the search correct? Well, that's not the process. that's not a systematic review. You haven't followed the a priori protocol. You haven't followed it correctly. So we really encourage you to, if you're thinking about this, just shoot us an email, let us know, and we can work with you and advise you on the process, or we can be a part of your team. And thank you all for the wonderful comments that you're leaving in the chat. We really appreciate those comments, and we hope that you're getting some good information out of these workshops that we're providing.
And if you do have to leave, we do have a workshop survey. So if there's any topics that you'd like to see in the future, or just some general feedback, please fill out the survey for us if you have some time.